Hey there. While I was researching stuff for the Power Mac G4 project, I found a couple of these interesting ads from back in the day that advertised all these different Mac products. And I did some window shopping, and that's what I'm going to do today. I'm not going to buy any of these, but it's just interesting to see the prices back in the day and what was available back in the day. Yep, this is from 1999. You see, here's an iMac G3, 333 megahertz, $1,200. um, Here's an iBook. These are really pretty, but I kind of think that they're pretty useless for nowadays things unless you have a specific thing you want to do with them. Might be able to do older Mac stuff well, like early 90s games or such. And there it is. There is the Power Mac G4, the one that I used, the one that I restored. And it's advertising how much better it is than all these other computers, Pentium 3, etc. But it doesn't give a price for some reason, and I'm not sure why. Maybe it had just come out and they weren't sure of the price, but it doesn't look like you could have ordered it from this particular issue. So yep, so that's exactly what I have, except I do not have the zip drive. It's right here. I think you can see my mouse because just didn't come with it, and that as a format failed. So I'm not sad that it didn't come with it. It would have been nice just as another piece of conversation. Hey, I've got a zip drive, but I would never use it for anything. But here's what I thought was interesting. We have here listed some monitors from back in the day. Seems like a pretty good price for this one here, 17-inch for $400 with a rebate. That's why it's such a good deal. You see 1600 by 1200. I don't even know what that means. 16 inches viewable. So the screen itself is actually only 16 inches. I thought about getting a CRT for my Power Mac G4, but even if they don't cost too much on eBay, they cost a lot to ship them. And it makes total sense. They're really heavy. So I never got one. I'm just using a LCD that I got at Goodwill for $10, and it works. It's not what the machine came with. And you see here, Apple Studio 21-inch was $1,500, and here you have a flat screen one for $1,300. This is not the flat screen I was expecting. I have seen flat screens from around the same time on eBay. Again, too much with shipping, and yeah, I just didn't get it. I have my LCD that I got at Goodwill, and it probably works just as good as this Apple Studio 15-inch, but wild to see these prices. Okay, now we're going to jump to the next year because that's the one that shows the prices for the Power Mac G4. So here we are. This is 2000. So right on the front page, we have new iMacs for as low as $800. And you see the parts that are in these. So it says $800, but the cheapest one on the front page, at least, is 400 megahertz, 64 megs of RAM, 10 gig hard drive, possibly the same one that I have in my Power Mac G4, 24 speed CD-ROM, not a CD writer, and 56K modem. And you see all the way up here, 500 megahertz processor, 128 megs of RAM. That's still not a good amount, even for back then. The Power Mac G4 needed at least 64 megs of RAM, but could go all the way up to 1.5 gigs, which is what I have. But I can't imagine how much it would have cost to get 1.5 gigs of RAM in the Power Mac G4 back in the day. Some of the stuff on here, it's just curious. I don't even know what these things are. A bus station modular, USB bus station modular. Don't know what that is. FireWire USB hard drive. So they had external hard drives back in the day, but apparently they cost almost $1,000, and I thought that external SSDs were expensive. Here's another interesting thing. I remember these packages for Microsoft Office for Mac. I'm sure that people who actually worked in computer retail back in the day probably hated them because software usually comes in a box or maybe a CD for a reason. They're very easily stacked and easy to display. These being rounded, I'm sure were a pain to deal with compared to just boxes. But see how expensive these things are. My goodness. And here's the G4, original G4. So it's only a year after the first one that we looked at, but it's now calling these original G4s at blowout prices, only $1,300. Holy cow. And yeah, here's the monitor I've seen that is on eBay pretty frequently, but just too much money. Mine does not have 500 megahertz. As I said, it has 450, up to 256 megs of RAM. I got a gig and a half. Yeah, it says EXP, expandable to 1.5 gigs. And that's the graphics card I have, the ATI Rage Pro 128. This is the biggest hard drive you could get, was 27 gigs apparently. So mine wasn't that small, I guess. And yes, I have the DVD RAM or ROM drive. It can write CDs, I think, but it's also a DVD RAM drive. Some of them came with zip drives, which was this thing right here. But like I said, that is a media format that never took off, was a flash in the pan, and no one uses them anymore. So not a big loss that mine doesn't have it. Now presenting the new 500 megahertz dual processor G4. Mine is a single processor G4. Later G4s did come where you could plug two processors in, which is I can't imagine how much faster they must be than mine. $1,600 though. I have never spent that much on a computer. $1,600. 500 megahertz dual processors, 40 gig hard drive. Still, well, back then that was pretty good. That was pretty good for back then. But then up to only 256 megs of RAM, expandable to a gig and a half. Why did you only sell them with that little? Again, I'm thinking that RAM must have been really expensive back in the day. Maybe they'll be in this circular, this ad here, where we can see the prices. But we have some prices here. The G4 with the 400 megahertz, etc., etc., 1,600. The G4 with two 450 dual processors, $2,500. The PowerMac G4 with two 500 megahertz processors, 256 megs of RAM, 40 gig hard drive, DVD RAM, 56K modem, $3,500. New iMacs. You have these colorful ones, the CRT monitor where you could see it, four luscious new colors. And they had this thing called the PowerMac G4 Cube, $1,800, which was more of a compact, I guess, system. Revolutionary no fan design. I am sure that had no thermal throttling whatsoever. Computers need fans. Don't anything with a motherboard that has power into it should have a fan. Here's another USB or FireWire hard drive. Holy cow, 3 gigs for 320 bucks. You can get 2 terabytes for less than that today. Portable USB drive. This might have been for, well, yeah, they're showing it next to a laptop. $440. Today, you can get a Blu-ray drive for a lot cheaper than that. As easy to use as a floppy drive, allegedly. No, it wasn't. Floppies lasted longer than zip, and more people use them. I thought about right here, USB iMac external floppy drive. I thought about getting an external floppy drive. That's the one thing that's missing from the Power Mac G4. Computers from 1999 should have a floppy drive, period. But Mac was on the zip drive bandwagon, which didn't pan out, and it doesn't have a floppy drive. But USB floppy drive for $80. That's not too bad considering the other prices we're seeing here. So, but no, I have not gotten a USB floppy drive. Of note, I believe that floppies for Mac are formatted differently than floppies for PC. So I think that you had to buy a specific kind of floppy for Macs. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I couldn't just get I could not just get a external floppy drive that through USB for a PC and just put it in my use it for my Power Mac G4. It wouldn't work. Here are some iBooks as low as $1,600. Again, I've never spent that much on a computer, and these, let's see the specs of these. I do like how these ones look. It's just today, because of how slow they are, 366 megahertz processor, 12-inch display. I don't know if that's good for back then or not. 64 megs of RAM, expandable only to 320 megs, and only up to 6 gigs hard drive. So here are the prices for these iBooks. 300 megahertz, $1,600. Graphite one, $1,800. Macs have always been expensive. PCs might have been this expensive back then too, but this ad thing is specifically for Macs. The PowerBook G3. Now this looks a lot more like a laptop would have back then, I imagine. $2,500. 500 megahertz processor, 14-inch display. That's not bad. Most of them today are 15. You could get up to a half a gig of RAM and a 12 gig hard drive. Oh, look at this. It shows the ports that were on this PowerBook, I believe it's called. Yes, PowerBook. So we have Ethernet 10100, which is fine for back then. I don't know if 1 gig internet existed, the standard yet. 2 USB ports, would have been USB 1.0. External monitor port, which would have been VGA, it looks like. Infrared window, so had some infrared capabilities. 56K modem. S-video, that's interesting. And 2 FireWire and sound ports. And here it shows also memory upgrades specifically for the PowerBook. So we have, I'm guessing this is per stick rather than like several sticks that add up to this. Holy cow. That is why they weren't putting laptop memory costs different. It has to have a different form factor than desktop memory, but 256 megs of RAM for $410. Whew, holy cow. Yeah. And again, you see the prices of these PowerBook G3s all the way up to $3,500. Again, we have the Power Mac G4 Cube. This is the mouse I have, actually. Quiet, no fan. I cannot imagine that thing did not thermal throttle. I liked, though, how their optical drives worked, like a slot. I'd have to remind myself each time I put a CD in, though, that this is not a shredder. It is a drive. I wanted this keyboard, the translucent one, clear one, but too expensive every time I saw one. And here's another CRT for $500 for a 17-inch. 22 inches for $4,000. I imagine maybe it's one of these, a flat screen. And these are the ones I keep seeing on eBay, but never for a low enough price that I would buy one. $1,000 back then though for 15-inch flat panel display. G4 Cube, yeah, this is the other picture. It's what it looked like inside. They had to make everything up because they wanted to be Apple wanted to be Apple and make something that was unique, and unique it was. It does look cool. It's just if you're going to build a computer, there's a reason that they come in towers like they do, in cases like they do. It's because that lends itself well to expansion and such. I've looked at these speakers. I'll see if they're on in here separately. I found them for like 20 bucks. The speaker that's on the Power Mac G4 is pretty decent, so I haven't felt a need to get these, and most of them look really bad now. It's been 25 years, so... Oh. It's bragging about something that someone would never do. You can put up to 127 USB devices through your USB ports, even though you only have two of them. If you had USB hubs, no one has done that except for Linus Tech Tips, and only to show that it's possible. No one would ever do that. Here's a pretty iMac G3 in indigo. I love the way these look, but like the laptops that had the same colorful schemes, they can't possibly be as fast or useful. They are really nice looking, but to get one today, it just doesn't make sense because just like a laptop, just like the G4 Cube, the motherboard had to be shaped a specific way to fit in this case and doesn't lend itself well to expansion. Oh, here's a capture card, it looks like. Video Effects Video Capture Suite. Has, I don't remember what kind of USB port that's called, but that's a USB port. Video, and S-Video, it looks like. Early capture card for 110. Here's something kind of interesting. More prices for monitors. So here we have a 14-inch viewable for 156 from ViewSonic. That's a decent brand. I think I've had some of those in the past. And that's a decent resolution too. So yeah, they could be had at a decent price. NEC, 4,000 for this one. Holy cow. LCD. LCD was still new. I don't think LED was a thing yet. Here's something that's interesting. We have here something called an orange converter, which you connected to the computer using the FireWire, and then you could plug in SCSI devices, SCSI. I only know how to say that because I've seen it on LGR and other computer YouTubers' videos. I have zero experience with SCSI. I don't know as if I've ever seen SCSI devices. Oh, well, here we finally have some prices on zip drives. And they were apparently, well, that's a gig, 2 gigs, so that's a lot of space for back then. So here's another thing that's interesting. Probably say that a lot. These sound sticks by Harman Kardon. I think that they were designed specifically for the Mac, for Apple. Wow, they were expensive. All of them altogether $200. I've seen this separately, the subwoofer, and I've seen these. I think I've seen them all together. Usually they're expensive when I see them on eBay, and they're usually pretty dirty looking because they're clear and didn't age well. Oh, here we go. Here is the RAM speeds. Or it's not speeds, but prices. So Power Mac G4, 64 megs was $100. Yeah. This is why they were seemingly only putting in just a little bit of RAM. $410 for 256 megs of RAM. for a Power Mac G4. So let me do some quick math and see how much. So a gig of RAM would cost $1,640 about for a Power Mac G4. They don't have 512 meg sticks listed here. So how would you have upgraded it to the Max 1.5 if there's only 4 slots and you can only put 256 megs max in them? But yeah, a gig of RAM would have been $1,640, and that is more than I've ever spent on a computer. But yeah, it shows RAM was so expensive back then. And I'm looking at DDR4 prices now and, whining about them to myself. And wow. Yeah, over here it does not show any 512 meg options for any of these models. Did they just not exist back then? I mean, they must have if they were bragging that it could be expanded to 1.5 gigs. So I hope that was interesting. I had fun looking through these, seeing the prices of stuff back then, how much my G4 would have cost back in the day. Finding out that I have $2,400 worth of RAM in my Power Mac. It's wild, but it's interesting just to see the prices of things back then, and it takes you back. If you don't know, these kind of circulars or ads would come out. This type of one, you'd have to ask for it, like send away for the. You have to send away for this catalog with all these prices in them to get it. But some companies, if you don't know, if you weren't in the United States, would just send you catalogs of all kinds of stuff. Sears used to do it, and Sears is bankrupt now. I think completely. They stopped coming out with catalogs a long time before they went bankrupt, though. And J.C. Penney, they had them for Best Buy, smaller, and all kinds of different companies. I remember always looking through Musician's Friend, I think it's called, which had guitars and bass guitars, drums, all that kind of stuff. I used to look through them when I was supposed to be doing my work in school. Yeah, so interesting. Hope you enjoyed. I will. am planning on having more Power Mac G4 content. I bought a couple games as I teased on that post, and I will probably stream them and turn them into a YouTube video. So thanks for watching.